I want to be all this. I want to be more. Oh, come on, let's be all this. Let's be more, more, more. I want to be all this. Oh, I want to be more, more, more. Come on, let's be all this. Let's be more. Say the first thing that comes to mind. Mindfulness. We're all one body. In the next reality, we're all one, all one. Yes, I'm sure. Come on, let's be. Let's be all this. Let's be more, more, more. Come on, let's be. Let's be all this, all this. Let's be more.
Thank you very much. Help me welcome back Desmond Whitney right here on the bass, everybody. The one and only Wachira Weigerstone right there on drums. Thank you all very much.
You're a blessing to us. So, some of you weren't here last week, but last week I announced that I'm going to be retiring. And so I've been, so I'm here through July, and then we'll go through a process, and it's all good. But I wanted to remind you that I'm retiring. I'm not dying. People have come to me like, oh, I hope your last days are good. And, I'm still planning on living and being in the world, and it's just a retirement. So, but I'm grateful. It's kind of funny. It's kind of like watching, you're getting to attend your own funeral. I posted something on Facebook, and it's been really quite heartwarming to have all these people post different things through my 25-year career of different ministries of how words that I've said and things that I've done have impacted other people's lives, and that's a really beautiful thing. We all impact other people's lives, and we all have a gift to bring to the world. So I just wanted to say that, I'm fine. Don't call the mortician yet. I'm planning on sticking around for a while, and life's good. We are in the most beautiful time of the year, I think, as we watch. This really is, living in Utah, this is really my favorite time when the newness is still budding and the snow is still on the mountains, and there's just this wonderful interplay between not quite yet, right? And I think that's kind of how I feel with my life, is not quite yet. Something's still here, something's emerging, what's going on here? It is also, in traditional Christian circles, Palm Sunday. And so because I'm a Bible guy, I like to talk about these things, perhaps differently than we remember it. You see, when I was a kid, all of these days had huge significance. But I love the story. I was rereading some stories around Palm Sunday and this wonderful thing that's called the Passion Week. As Palm Sunday represents the day when Jesus is re-entering into Jerusalem, and there's some pretty dramatic things that are going to unfold over this next week. But I'm struck by this juxtaposition between power and humility. You see, Jesus was born in the most humble of circumstances. And yet they proclaimed him a king and Messiah and all of these wonderful counselor. And so the message for us, I think, to look at is how do we bridge this place between being powerful and being humble? You see, one of the things that happens for us very often is our ego thinks that we have the power. And our ego tends to identify our power with our status, with our resume, with our income, with our things of the world. But I would suggest to you that there is another way of being and another way to look at this. So I'm struck by this passage of Jesus re-entering into Jerusalem for Passover. And you say, why would he go to Passover? And I would say because he was a Jewish rabbi. It would make sense, right? You would go to celebrate Passover. Sometimes that gets forgotten in the story. In fact, I was... okay, I wasn't even going to do this, but I'm going to. My pet peeve, one of them, is when I hear people on TV say, you know, we are a Christian nation. And I just say, not so much. A little reading of history would tell us that we are a nation that is independent of organized religion, and you might say more appropriately, based on Christian Judeo principles, and you'd be okay. But we are not a Christian nation. We are a secular nation. Just like to get that out there. So I'm kind of fascinated when people speak as if something is true. So sometimes with my Christian friends, I always like to remind them that Jesus was indeed Jewish and a rabbi and was teaching according to the wisdom that he knew, but bringing forth a new awareness and a new insight and a new possibility and therefore a new power that was available to us. So when Jesus is speaking and moving into this phase, it's Palm Sunday, Jesus is riding on a humble little donkey into Jerusalem. And the story goes that the people were so enamored with this amazing person and his powerful messages, and the stories were out there about the healings and the changing life, and people were convinced that this was the person that was going to free them of the Roman domination. You see, a new kingdom would come forward, and Israel would return to its powerful place in the world. It would become a world power with a new king. So they were excited. Who wouldn't be excited? And so they did their equivalent of ticker tape parades, which is palms, because, ticker tape hadn't been invented yet. So, right? So we're waving palms and placing palms. It's kind of the red carpet treatment, you might think of it, as Jesus is entering into the kingdom. And I'm thinking about what that must be like when you know your mission and you know your message, and yet the world around you is celebrating something else. Have you ever had that experience? Have you ever had that experience where you're listening to the divine promptings of Spirit and the world is saying to you things like, how are you going to make a living? Let's be practical, right? Or they're saying, you could be great at that. You could monetize that and make a ton of money. I always say that this balance of the ego, that if you had the capacity to turn water into wine, would you not be just a little tempted to go into business? I mean, I'm thinking, right? Because you see, the ego wants to say, well, how do I put that into the world? How do I make my living? How do I conform these things? But the message is this humble servant of the divine who recognized his inherent divinity and in truth recognized the inherent divinity of all people It is that which he called forth in the healing miracles, when he saw the spiritual prototype of the individual, not their disease, not their brokenness, but saw the inherent divinity, that spiritual prototype that resides within each one of us. And that's what I believe he was calling forth. So, in this message, in this unfolding drama that's happening, he's entering into the world, and the world is saying, yippee, our king is here. But Jesus was speaking to a different reality. Jesus was speaking to a dimension of being where he said to us that we are spiritual in nature. And when we understand the truth of who we are, when we understand our inherent spiritual divinity, then we can live in right relationship with all of life. See, I don't believe that Jesus called us to live a life of poverty. Actually, just the opposite. But poverty is not based on how much stuff you have or how little stuff you have. Poverty is a mindset. And so there are those who have great wealth but live in poverty. There are those who live in seeming poverty who have great wealth. Mother Teresa spoke to this idea time and again as she would decry some of the ways of the world, and she would say, you know, you have so much and yet you give so little. Where in her work she was seeing the face of the beloved in every situation, in every circumstance. That was her job. So as we're moving through this world, we're always dealing with this idea of ego versus spirit. And the ego, as I said, often likes to believe that our worth is derived by our productivity, by what we do, what we create, what we accomplish, what we accumulate. And we point to those things and say, see, I got a lot of money, I must be okay, right? Or I have a big, long title. Of course, in our community, I always say, since it's all volunteer, you can have whatever title you want. You know, whatever makes you feel good, you can make it as long as you want because we're still not going to pay you. So make that work for you. But as this story unfolds and we move through all of the unfolding drama, it is not the things of the world that Jesus was calling us to be. What I think about in this story, as Jesus surrendered to the larger story that was emerging through him, of letting go of his human self and embracing his Christ self, to stand as a witness to our inherent divinity in the world and the power that unleashed throughout the ages. Now, whether you believe literally or metaphorically, that's not my job to understand, but help look at this understanding that when we are using as this great example for who we can be, and we are listening to the inherent spiritual wisdom that each of us has, we must learn to be in authentic communication with self. One of the things that I realize is that we are given gifts, and we are given talents, and we are given abilities. And it's the most interesting thing to me that because they are natural to us, we tend to discount them. Have you noticed that? That if it's easy for us, we think it's no big deal. I was talking to my friend Sally the other day, who's an amazing woman. She puts productivity to a whole nother level. And so she was talking about this job and what she's doing, and she created this whole marketing plan and blah, 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 blah. You know, it was like, and I said, I stand in amazement. That is amazing to me that you can do that. She said, no, it's no big deal. That's just what I do. And then we were talking a little further, and I was sharing how I made dinner for 50 people the other night. And she's like, I'm amazed that you can do that. And I said, it's no big deal, right? Because in both cases, it's no big deal unless she tried to do my thing and I tried to do hers. And then it would be a big old mess. And yet sometimes in life, that's what we try and do. We try and live somebody else's version of life. We try and live somebody else's version of reality. We try and be inauthentic to who we are. So listening to that spirit within us that is calling forth our highest possibility. And it is given to us through our gifts. It is given to us through our talents. It is given to us through what brings us joy and fulfillment. Does this make sense? Do you believe it? Yes. Do you practice it? Yes. Okay, now we're into a different story, right? So we've been looking at this idea of, I'm really trying to follow this thing that I'm supposed to follow with the whole organization. So every once in a while I drive by and say a word that they say. But the message for today was about the power of your mind to create. And we know this. This is science of mind, yes? That the science of mind teaches us that we are not separate from a divine intelligence, but rather we are unified with the divine intelligence. And that we create or co-create with this divine intelligence through our own consciousness, through our own understanding of reality. And so there's a wonderful passage. Ernest Holmes was asked at one point, so what is it you believe? And so he wrote this lovely statement called What I Believe. And then, because we're humans, we decided, let's capture that and write it down. And then we changed it to what we believe. And now, those of us affiliated with Centers for Spiritual Living often say, I am, here's what we believe. And so, we're not heavy doctrinal, you've probably noticed. But, every once in a while somebody wants to know what you believe. And so we say, here it is. Wonderful line in it. He says, we believe. Let me get it. I gotta get the right voice here. We believe that in the control of conditions through the power of this mind. You like that? We believe in the control of conditions through the power of this mind. In other words, through the power of your mind, you can control the conditions in your life. Yes. And one might be tempted to think you can control all the conditions in your life with a statement such as that. And then you're driving along the street one day, going to your class, minding your own business, pulling up to a stoplight, and you look in the rearview mirror and you notice that some dude in a big old SUV is going to run into you. And he does. And you say to yourself, as I did Thursday night, what the? What was that all about? How did I control that condition, right? See, if I could really control the conditions as I saw him coming to me, I would say, stop that. Stop where you are. But lo and behold, he was having his own experience of life. And he's diabetic apparently, he had just gone and given blood, and as he was driving, all of a sudden, his reality changed. And what was light became dark, and what became driving became not driving. So he did the next logical thing. He tried to pull over to the road, couldn't see me because he was blacking out, and parked his car on mine. Now, in olden days, when I was new to the teaching, I would ask myself, what did I do to create that? But I'm not new to the teaching. I'm an evolved soul. So I looked at that and went, so we don't get to control conditions. We do influence our lives, have no question about that. But as I looked at that, I thought, this is not something that I have created. This is my opportunity to be of service. Here's a person who's having a situation. I didn't know what it was. He could have been having a heart attack. So, got on the phone, got the paramedics, did the whole thing, said, love you, bless you, going to class, right? And so I thought, this is not, it's not a good or a bad thing. It's just life happened. So sometimes we get so myopic in our thinking about this thing, and we judge things as good or bad. And this was just an opportunity to be of service. And the truth is, it did absolutely no damage to my car or his. It's no big deal, right? We just got to have a little moment. And I got to be of service. And he got to be well, right? Now, the other thing that I realized early on in my ministry is that it doesn't matter what happens to you. It's all fodder for the next sermon. It's all good, right? Hey, whatever's happening, it's all good. Just write that down. Keep track of that, right? But you see, sometimes we think, oh, I've got to control conditions. The truth is, when we start to really understand this, and I think what Ernest Holmes would say to us, because this is a fascinating thing. I watched this, we're a couple generations now removed from Ernest Holmes. There's still a few people that knew Ernest, or there's still a few people that knew people that studied with Ernest. But we're almost at that point where we don't have direct lineage to Ernest Holmes. And what Ernest Holmes was doing was in the 1920s, in the late 20s and early 30s, he was looking at what was happening in the world and trying to make sense of is there a commonality between spiritual understanding and between philosophical understanding and scientific understanding? And what is that commonality? And then he put together a wonderful book called The Science of Mind. And then he gave us his best thinking as he had understood at the time. But you see, now we're a few generations away, and so we've documented these words. And so we stand up at these officious ceremonies, we put on our robes, and we say, what we believe. And we believe in the power to control conditions through the power of this mind. And Holmes would say to us, I didn't mean that. Right? I think he would. I think it's like Paul, who was kind of organizing this rabble-rousing group of new Jewish, not Jewish, Gentile-y kind of people that were creating communities together. And they had all kinds of questions. Like, what do we do? You just said, through Christ's love, everybody can come together, but now we got people that are slaves and slave owners. What do we do? So Paul jots off a letter and tells them, here's how you want to organize this. I don't think Paul realized that they would use this for the next 2,000 years to define how people should be, right? I don't think Holmes was saying that to us. In fact, what I believe to be true about Ernest, he would welcome the conversation. So I don't believe we can control conditions, but I do know we absolutely influence everything in our lives. And we do that because we have the capacity to grow and to expand and to be more spiritually aware. We have the power to create life according to our belief. We have the power to limit life through the power of our belief. If you don't believe this to be true, tell me all the things you can't do, and I will give you evidence of such things. You've proven it to be true. But what if that weren't so? What if that's just what I made up? What if I could expand beyond my current level of limitation? So the ego, this wonderful juxtaposition of spirit and ego, because it is a very empowering statement to say, I am the creator of my life. It is very powerful to recognize that through the words that we speak and the beliefs that we hold, we are influencing everything around us, that we are attracting to us situations and circumstances and things that will reflect who we are. The challenge is that we not get caught up in all of the stuff going on around us. You see, what I watch in the life of the humble servant, all of the opportunities that Jesus had to be exalted, to be lifted up, to be a worldly figure. That's what people wanted. That's what they wanted. And this great story of being in the garden, of having this surrender moment to not my will, but thy will be done through me, is what unleashed the spiritual power that has influenced billions of lives over the years. Now, I don't know, had he said, okay, I'll do it, I'll be king, would he be a footnote in history of some king that didn't quite make it, right? But because he was speaking to the greater reality of who we are, that we can overcome the world. He taught us that, see, I don't believe that Jesus was teaching us that the world is a bad thing. I don't think he was teaching us that we should be in poverty. I don't think he was teaching us that we should be sick. I think he was saying you can have well-being, physical, financial, all ways, but understand your right relationship. And we understand our right relationship by first seeking the spiritual dimension, by recognizing our true, authentic self, and then to live from that place to create a life that is filled and overflowing with good. The ego wants to build that life through the accumulation of the good, and then once we arrive, we're okay. It's interesting, isn't it? We can get stuck. So I think as we're moving into this era, I believe very powerfully that something amazing is taking place on our planet. And it looks scary and it looks chaotic, as it always does when one paradigm is moving into the next. And we look around ourselves, and if we only view what's happening in the world at the level of circumstance, it can be quite frightening. But what I sense and what I feel is there is an awakening that is taking place. And we are being called at a global level to know the truth of who we are, to know our spiritual magnificence, to celebrate our differences. We do not need to overcome. We need to come together. We need to honor all paths to the divine. We need to celebrate the many pathways. We need to reveal the love that was promised through Jesus, through the Buddha, through Krishna, and all the great masters. You see, what they said was love one another. Not get more stuff. Nothing wrong with stuff, but they're saying really, when it's all said and done, can you love one another? We are in a time where there is an emergent reality taking place. And so by its very nature, the old must fall away, and the new must come forward. And we, as spiritual beings, must recognize the role that we play in that evolution of thought for humanity. You see, I was thinking about this with this guy that ran into me. I thought, if I weren't a highly evolved soul, would my temptation be to jump out of my car and punch him? Why'd you run into me, right? Of course, it's hard to punch somebody that can't even pay attention to you. He's like, look at me, I'm trying to punch you. But, right? But the Master's telling us, don't respond at the level of ego. Don't respond at the level of your lowest instinct. Bring it to a higher level of compassion, of love, of joy, of understanding. And so in the midst of this transformation, in the midst of this transformative week, Jesus is moving through example of example of example of the human making way to the divine. So that the ultimate story becomes the death, but more importantly, the resurrection of life fulfilled. Metaphorically, I want us to understand this happens for us over and over again. That in order for new life to emerge, we must die to the old. And the ego says, I don't want to die. I'll take control. I'll take over here. I'll run this thing, right? So when we're surrendering to life unfolding, we're breathing into that, and we're learning to move away from observing the world at the level of form, at the level of effect, and moving into an awareness of life revealing itself, and that the way I am and the intention that I hold in the presence of that is what determines the outcome. So as we sang, I choose love. I can choose fear or I can choose love. I can choose compassion. I can choose understanding. I can choose to be a healing presence in the midst of whatever's going on. And if there was ever a time in the history of humanity to practice, I'd say we're in it. Right? So who will you be? What will you choose? As we move into this week, allow the power that is just associated with this week, whether you believe literally or otherwise, but there's a power that happens in this story, in the Passover, in Easter, in the spring equinox, of life moving out of one way of being, and it's as if nothing was happening, and now life's happening. And blooms are coming forth. There's a re-emergence. This is the emergence that we want to move into. What wants to be born in you right now? What is seeking its revelation? What is seeking to be revealed? What brings you joy? What brings you fulfillment? My suggestion is that's what yours to do. To bring more joy, to bring more love to the world through your gifts. I honor and celebrate you on the pathway. Let's take a moment to pray together, shall we? Our beautiful practitioners are making their way forward. And we simply move into that awareness of the one life, ever present, always available. The one life coursing in and through and as all of existence. This divine creative intelligence, whether we call it God or the 10,000 other names. But is the one presence that is revealing itself in and as all things. The presence of love making itself known. The divine intelligence that has caused the entire universe to be an expression, that causes the planets to remain in perfect balance and motion, that causes the rains to fall, that causes the flowers to grow. And it is in this life that we live and move and have our being. That there is a divine intelligence that is in the air, it is in the breath, and it is that in that which causes us to breathe. So we remember our oneness. We remember that we are already connected with the whole. And so we call forth the presence of divine love to heal and uplift our hearts, to see with new eyes and to hear with new ears, to open our capacity for compassion, to fully and freely forgive, to choose love over every other option. And we allow our relationships to be healed and transformed through the power of divine love. We speak this word of truth as we recognize wholeness as the order of the day. And we allow that wholeness to reveal itself as health and well-being at every level of being. Spiritually, mentally, emotionally, physically. We are whole, perfect being right now. We recognize and know that we are abundant beings by our very nature. We are creative beings by our very nature. And as we cooperate with this divine intelligence, as we practice unconditionally giving and unconditionally receiving of the divine bounty, we notice a flow to our lives that is joyous and fulfilling. We are blessed. And so I'm inviting you in this moment, as we move into this time of resurrection, is there something that now that needs to be released, now needs to be let go of, so that the new life can emerge triumphant? I invite you in this moment to let that go, to release, to allow, to surrender to the greater yet to be. And how good it is to bear witness to this spiritual truth and reality. As I speak this word of truth, I recognize that we are blessed, blessed beyond measure, at every level of being. We extend that blessing and we bless this spiritual community. this divine idea unfolding with our greater good yet to be known. And we extend that blessing to our brothers and sisters around the planet, to the planet herself. We see her in harmony with herself, honoring all creation. We hold a high vision for a world that works for all. And as is our custom, we bless all priests, all rabbis, ministers, teachers of every faith and all faith traditions. For we recognize and know there are many pathways to the divine, and therefore we honor and celebrate them, knowing greater truth is revealed in the world. For all of these blessings and so many more, I'm simply giving thanks. I'm allowing it to be so, as together we say, and so it is.